Good afternoon, Worldwide House Church friends, or whatever time of the day it is for you. This is Dr. Jay Dykstra, and today we are talking about making your money more fruitful and fulfilling. And guess what? It doesn't even matter how much money you have or don't have, this talk is going to be relevant to you. So, I want to begin with a story. It's a story about a really generous, big-hearted friend of mine. I rub elbows with a lot of people who have a lot of money, and a lot of people who don't have a lot of money, being a physician, and this is a friend who did have a lot of means and wanted to use them well. He wanted to use his dwelling to be able to provide a safe environment for his family and invite people over. He wanted to use his money for his family, to provide them with traveling and educational opportunities. And he wanted to use his money at his church to be able to provide for those in greatest need. However, as time went on, he realized that this money that he was using wasn't as fruitful or fulfilling as he hoped for. The money that was being devoted to his dwelling, I would hear stories about landscaping formations being washed away, about a boat that he had that he never really used, and about the upkeep and maintenance and repairs of the things he was buying being far more costly and stressful than they were worth. As far as the money he devoted to his family, that money actually became a source of divisiveness for their relationships, eventually helping to drive their family apart. And as far as money being devoted to his church, he found that it was being used in selfish and even corrupt ways that were not benefiting the people in need that he wanted his money to benefit. Part of the reason for this is that we end up seeing money as an end. It's a bottom line, it's the goal for us, instead of seeing it as a tool or a means to the much more life-giving and satisfying end of being every part of who God created you to be. This talk is all about you and God reaching your full potential to maximize your difference for the people most in need that God created you to serve. And everything that follows is going to bring us back to that awesome, amazing end. So let's see how his story might actually apply to you. Like him, no doubt you are generous, well-intentioned, and big-hearted, but we tend to apply that generosity almost exclusively to the first world problems that we can see around us, not necessarily to the most dire needs where you'll make the biggest difference. Most of us are from a relatively affluent society, and the more affluent a society becomes, the more complicated and expensive its needs become. For example, helping someone through substance abuse takes a huge amount of personnel, time, and resources, and even then, no results are guaranteed. Compare that to the few pennies that it costs to address vitamin deficiency in someone or prevent malaria that would otherwise kill that person. Let me give you a few other examples of the ways that we do this. Many of us really value athletics for its physical activity and the community that it provides, and that's a great thing. And we offer a lot of our money and time to provide a good athletic environment to a lot of people, even those in need. That's wonderful, it is good-hearted, but what it offers and what it actually accomplishes compared to the lives that you could save, compared to the number of life years that you could give to someone for the same amount of money around the world, is tiny. Or let's consider events that we like to throw. Maybe it's a race, maybe it's a gala, a big party that is for fundraising purposes. What we often don't think about is the fact that these things cost a lot of money, and it takes a huge bite out of what we actually end up raising for the people in need. We also don't think about the fact that the bottom line, the big number that we raise on the check, might not even be used for effective purposes. Consider something like Make-A-Wish. I mean, who wouldn't want to give a few hours of an amazing experience to a child that has cancer or chronic illness, right? The problem is that money that's spent on that would literally save the lives of numerous children throughout the world, giving them each 60 to 70 years of life back. And you're not even improving the prognosis of the one child that you're helping. These pursuits are good, and they make us feel good, which is part of the reason we give to them. But often, eventually, we realize how little all of that time and stress actually accomplished, especially compared to what it could. Again, there's no blame here to any organization or to any person. We're trying to do what's good, and it's a natural response to the first world surroundings we have. But it is unfruitful ultimately, and unfortunately, it's also the approach to money that's been taught to you by the spiritual leaders that we trust to use our money that we've given to God. What example are they setting for us, and is that contributing to the problem? Well, for starters, Christianity Today tells us that the average church only gives 5 to 10% of its budget to people in need. You've all heard about how churches throw multi-million-dollar capital campaigns to raise money for facilities or buildings, encouraging you to get excited about giving them that money that'll benefit the institution. But how often do you hear about a church throwing a multi-million-dollar capital campaign to raise money to save the lives of thousands and thousands of people who are dying from easily preventable diseases every minute? Even when churches do give money to those in need, the amount is often over-exaggerated to its congregation. For example, the church I most recently attended claimed and publicized regularly that it gave 25% of its budgeted income to missional pursuits. And when I asked how that money was actually being spent, part of that, according to the church's own financial coordinator, was going to pay staff their own salaries and advertise. This is like paying yourself with your paycheck and claiming that it's charity giving. Now, don't get me wrong, churches do a lot of great things. They simply don't set us a very good model of generosity, and they really aren't the best and most fruitful place for us to give our money. The problem is that they tell you that they are. How often have you heard from a pastor that it's the local church institution, it's God's plan A for restoring the world? Of course, they don't mean any local church institution, it's theirs, and because of that, they say that you should be giving your money and your tithing to them. But is that God's plan A? Or is it something much different and much, much more fruitful? Instead of focusing our generosity on simply the local needs that we see around us, or giving it to a local institution, we see that God's model for generosity is to prioritize our tithing and giving where the need is the greatest. The first thing he reminds us about the tithe in Leviticus 27 is that it belongs to him. It isn't a pastor's money, it's not an institution's money. It's his money and needs to be spent according to his model of generosity. And then he tells us what the tithe was for. He says, first of all, that it's to be distributed in towns and even nationally by being brought to the temple. So it's not to be distributed to institutions or to be focused on institutions. Secondly, unlike what we hear from many church leaders, it's not only to be given to the people doing the work of the Lord. In this case, it was the Levites, a tribe of Israel that primarily did the work of the Lord and needed income from the people to be able to keep doing that. The Levites here most closely approximate anybody who depends on income to do the work of the Lord today, though, including nonprofits, including people outside the church, not simply church staff. Also, though, the tithe wasn't only to be given to these people, but to foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows, the people that were most in need who live in your town so they could eat and be satisfied. And look what happens when you follow the Lord's model of generosity and spend money as if it were his. He blesses you in all the work of your hands. This model of making your money more fruitful carries over into the New Testament, into the church. And it's not just a regional or national endeavor now, but it's a global endeavor. We see that Paul is taking money that was raised by those in Macedonia and Achaia, contributing it to the poor among the Lord's people in Jerusalem, thousands of kilometers away. They were pleased to do it because they realized the spiritual benefits that the people in Jerusalem had given them. In other words, they received something from the church in Jerusalem, and so they are providing for the needs of the people in Jerusalem, even though they have nothing to do with their own local church institution and are thousands of kilometers away. We see this model perfectly depicted in Acts 4, where all the believers, not just those from a church institution or certain region, were one in heart and mind, and no one claimed that any of their possessions was their own. They shared everything that they had. We see that God was so powerfully at work in them that there was no needy person among them, and they would come and bring their excess to be distributed to anyone, anywhere in the world who had need. This is because God's plan A is actually a very global and worldwide body of Christ. It's not a local group or institution. We see in 1 Corinthians 12 that we were all, not just the people from your church, all of us were baptized by one Spirit to form one body, regardless of our ethnicity or origin. And we can't say to each other that we don't need each other or that any part is less important. In fact, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker, God says are indispensable, right? Why? Why does he arrange it this way? Well, he put the body together so there should be no division and that its parts should have equal concern for each other. Because if one part suffers truly, every part suffers with it if we are a global and not local entity. And if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. This stands in stark contrast to the 83% of a church's budget that church staff uses to pay themselves and for their facilities. This is especially unjustifiable given the fact that there are thousands and thousands of teachings available online for free by very qualified clergy and lay people and professors on the topics that are the most relevant for you and the questions that you're asking. These are topics that many clergy would not touch with a 10-foot pole from the pulpit because of the controversy they would cause in their congregations. The fact of the matter is that God's plan A is not a local church institution. God's plan A is the worldwide body of Christ, the global kingdom of heaven that Jesus ushered in, where excess anywhere meets need anywhere. If you think about us being the body that we are from God's perspective, think about what we call it when an entity within that body starts primarily using the resources it receives on itself, growing and becoming more prominent at the expense of the other parts of the body, particularly those in greatest need. We call that cancer, don't we? I'm not at all saying that churches are cancers, and I'm certainly not saying that individuals, including the leaders of churches, are cancers either. We simply need to ask this question: if we are a global body of Christ, and if an entity in that is primarily using what it's been given, not to do its function for the betterment of the rest of the body, but to benefit itself and to grow itself at the expense of the rest of the body, is it acting more like a cancer or more like Christ? Christ himself tells us in Matthew 6:21 that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. And unfortunately, the model that we've been set for making our money fruitful by our spiritual leaders is one of inefficient and self-benefiting giving. This results in you following that example and learning that example and spending your money and them spending God's money in ways that simply aren't fruitful. So, how can we do something about this? Well, we need a change in our authority. We need a change in our role model, don't we? And fortunately, Jesus and the early church provide us with a wonderful one. Jesus prioritized giving outward, not inward, benefiting the whole body of Christ, not simply himself. And he does this in word and deed. He tells us in Matthew 25 that when he is going to come to judge us, he's going to do so according to what we did for the least of these, the people that had the least, the people that needed the most. And then he shows us how this happens indeed, by going throughout the towns and teaching and preaching and healing every sickness. He goes after the people who are harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Even in his day, he knew the religious leaders weren't caring for and showing true generosity to those in need. So he exemplified something different. He taught and healed free of charge for the least privileged, those most in need, and he did so out in public where they already were, not requiring that these people come into his walls, but going out to where they already lived and existed. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to pay somebody to do the work of God. We talked about how tithing should be used for that. I'm simply saying that Jesus shows us a much, much different and more fruitful example. And of course, that's why the early church did the same, with their house churches out in the community, and their self-supported leaders like Priscilla and Aquila and Paul. And that's why Worldwide House Church does the same too. We prepare and offer our teachings for free. And 100% of what you give at Worldwide House Church goes to the world's most in need, through those doing the most impactful work. We don't ever see a penny of it. These organizations don't give 83% of their money to themselves. They spend 83% and usually more than 90% of their budget on the very programs serving the most in need. Jesus set up his church very, very fruitfully. But he didn't just maximize the money that's given to those in need. He maximizes how much impact each of those dollars has. For example, did you know that multiple departments of the United States government has determined that it costs more than 2,000 times as much to save one life in the United States as it does to save a life in one of the poorest nations in the world? And remember, when you increase the amount of money you're giving from the 5 to 10% of a local church institution to the 100% that Worldwide House Church offers you, you've increased the impact of your money by over 20,000 times. This is great news because that means that anybody, even those who can only devote a little bit of money, like $10 a month, to a great cause, if they give it to the right places, can make 200,000 times the impact. Well, the question then becomes, what are these organizations? How do I make that kind of a difference? First, as hard as it is, remember that there are better reasons for giving than personal connections and pleas from loved ones, than advertisements or people who are really good at pulling your heartstrings. It's not wrong, obviously, to support an organization that a friend or family member wants you to, but realize that you could actually serve the population they care about much better through different organizations. Realize that those who are advertising are literally professionals at manipulating your emotions to give them money, and the fact that you're seeing their ads and knowing who they are probably is indicative of the fact that they spend more of their money on advertising and fundraising than they do on the people that they're serving. And finally, when you see a video or a picture that's just emotionally evocative realize that you can help far more of the type of people you're seeing if you give through more effective organizations. In the end, these are emotionally laden pleas for your money, and they can be very effective, but lives literally are lost if we give in to them instead of using a more objective approach. You want to maximize your impact on the world. And Worldwide House Church makes this super easy for you by rating charities according to 4 parameters that make your giving way more fruitful. The first one and most important is impact evidence. We're actually measuring outcomes based on what the aid did. We're not saying this is what the organization did, we're saying this is what happened in the community as a result of that. This is super important because it objectively verifies that there was actually a benefit, not just to the money you gave, but to the services that were provided. For example, an organization can boast that they served 1 million meals, but if those meals were served to people who were obese, or do not need the type of nutrition that those meals provided, those meals did not offer much of a benefit, right? The second parameter that's important is financial efficiency, and this is the one that we're very familiar with through organizations like Charity Navigator or GuideStar or Charity Watch. These organizations measure what percentage of income goes to programs and the people that these organizations serve instead of to staff and administration. This is great, but if these programs don't have impact, if you can't measure an actual change, it doesn't matter if they give 100% of their money to their programs if they're not accomplishing anything, right? It's important, but only if there's impact. The third parameter is financial transparency. Are they actually being honest about the financial data they're providing? Is vital information being hidden? So if they're being open, and if we see that they are financially efficient, then we need to ask, well, are they impactful? If they are, that's a good sign. And the final parameter is relative need. Who else is providing the same aid? You might be providing very efficient, transparent, impactful aid to somebody, but if 20 other people are as well, your impact overall is not going to be that great. This is especially important when we consider giving to the places we naturally are allured to give to in our local communities instead of the places where they'll make the biggest impact. To illustrate this, consider the fact that 94% of United States charity dollars stay in the United States. And in the Christian world, ROI Ministries estimates that 97% of Christian donations actually go to Christians, and particularly the richest ones. So we have a big relative need problem. We're giving where the need isn't the greatest. Now, let me throw in the caveat here that these needs of the developed world, needs of people in the United States and other similar societies are very, very important. And some of you have been specifically created to address them. Some of you are very, very concerned or gifted in the areas of the empowerment of women or other equality issues. Or maybe it's homelessness or substance abuse. Or maybe it's mental health. Or maybe it's you fill in the blank. The list goes on and on. These needs are crucial and critical, and we cannot ignore them. So how do we use our money most fruitfully and yet still serve the people that we're impassioned to right around us? Well, the answer, fortunately, is very easy. You don't just have money to make the biggest difference with, you have your time and your cultural knowledge as well. So use your money around the world, among the neediest populations where it will do the most good. And that's what we're talking about in this talk. But use your time and your cultural awareness to address the needs among the people around you in your own society, to address those issues. That's how Worldwide House Church wants you to make the best of both worlds and be able to impact both types of populations. So it's not a matter of not caring about the people around you with these needs in the first world. It's realizing that 20 people are already caring for them. And when you divert your resources to care about someone that nobody's caring about, there will still be 19 people caring for these people. And that's important to remember. Relative need is huge. This is what I like to call charity equality and charity diversity, where we're not giving all our charity dollars to one population or to one location, but spreading it out among diverse groups of people, many of whom need it more, and spreading them out more equally. We all like equality and diversity, so I want to promote that. Now some of you, it's not so much the needs of the people around you that cause you to give domestically or give locally. It's the fact that you yourself benefit from giving. If you're being honest, and you know what? We all like to benefit from our money, even the charity dollars we give. But I want to emphasize the cost of doing so. And hopefully when you see that cost, you will be motivated to give in much more fruitful ways. This type of cost-benefit analysis can be wrapped up in the concept of the opportunity cost, which is what you would have received had you spent your money in a different place instead of where you did. Now, this concept is extremely important, not just for your charitable donations, but also for your personal financial decisions. Always ask, what is the cost? Not just in money, but in time and in stress, to what I'm spending my money on. What could I have that I'm not going to have if I spend my money this way? Please ask yourself this question. It is hugely important. And let's look at how this plays out when we consider some of the benefits and costs in the context of a church institution. Many of us like the benefit of socializing at church, where we make friendships, and sometimes even more than friendships. And this, of course, is a wonderful pursuit. We like to have community, and there's everything right with that. But there's a cost to it as well. The programs that give us this community are not free. Let's consider an average young adults program. It costs the same amount of money as giving 153 at-risk children an entire year of food, education, and spiritual growth via the benefits of sponsorship. Is your socializing at church really that important? Well, let's consider the whole of what a church accomplishes over the year. For the annual budget of one average church, 367 African women lose their entire year of salary. Now remember, it's not just them, it's the children they're providing for that lose out. These children become sick or hungry, or even worse, become addicted to drugs or join gangs or even militias that hurt others, all because these women weren't empowered to be able to provide for their families. Is that worth whatever good your church is accomplishing? Let's consider an even bigger factor. Every $1 million spent on church buildings, renovations, or mortgage interest, and remember that last one's completely wasted. That cost 443 beautiful people their lives as a result of dying from malaria. Those lives could have been saved if that money went to them through the best organizations. And for every facility built, not just $1 million, but for every average building that's built, not maintenance costs, not the cost to keep running it and run the programs, but for every facility that's just built, 1,267 people lose their lives. All because the church didn't spend their money saving those lives and spent it on a building instead. These costs, of course, are much larger as the churches get bigger. These are just average church costs. Tell me, are 1,267 people alive and not dead simply because your church building was built? Are 443 people alive instead of dead just because your church raised $1 million to put on an addition? The costs are huge and the benefit is relatively so small, which is why Jesus set up his church so differently. Think of if it were you. Think of a loved one you couldn't bear to lose, holding that loved one in your arms as their life slips away after suffering from an easily preventable and cheaply preventable disease. Think of the way your church spends money now. Would you accept that? Would you not say, please, it's so easy to save this life, just do it? Would you be okay with them devoting those resources to repaving the parking lot or recarpeting the sanctuary? Or would you want them to meet the greatest needs? That's what's happening around the world. As I've been talking, scores of people have lost their lives from those kind of diseases because we're not using our money in the most fruitful ways. You wouldn't want that to happen if it was you. You know the kind of joy and restoration it would bring if the money was used in more fruitful ways, and that's the kind of joy and restoration you can bring to them. Do they suffer any less than you? Do they love their loved ones any less than you? Do they feel this pit of despair when their loved ones suffer and die any less than you would? Of course not. Churches aren't going to save these people. You are. And that's why Worldwide House Church researches from 15 different prominent charity evaluators a composite analysis of the very best institutions that will allow you to make the biggest difference, to minimize your cost and maximize your impact. If there were a better way, honestly, to use money and to make it more fruitful, we would find it and we would do it ourselves so that we could communicate it to you. Okay, that's a lot to think about, so let's summarize before we keep moving forward. To make your money most fruitful, first, don't give to what makes you feel the most good, give to what makes you accomplish the most good. Feelings are fleeting, fruit is fulfilling. For a well-intentioned person like you, who no doubt gives to good things, remember that the enemy of the best is the good, not the bad. You won't blow your money on horrible things, but you might have sacrificed the best and most fruitful you by giving to a less impactful good enough. Don't. Realize the amazing potential God gave you instead by using your time to do the most good in your community and using your money to do the most good around the world. Second, the head of the church is not a pastor but Jesus, and his plan A is not a local church institution but his global body. Our offerings aren't meant to pay churches a fee that serves our interests. They're meant to pay God a debt that serves his interests. It's his money, and the offering plate certainly isn't the best way to honor him. Besides, there are many more efficient and effective ways than church institutions to enjoy uplifting music, find close community, and learn what we often already know about God. So our resources need to prioritize the least reached, just like he did, which is far more worshipful to him anyway. And thirdly, maximize measurable impact. Give where the need is greatest and never ever forget the cost. Teaching pastors can be so great, but they have free and often more helpful counterparts online. Facilities can be necessary, but not when they're right by each other, even across the street, paying massive and redundant costs for buildings, mortgage interest, staff, materials, and energy waste, all to overserve the same population. This leaves the unserved even less served. Jesus in the New Testament church met in homes, public places, and outside to find and befriend the less served. Hey, we don't hate church institutions. They've done plenty of good. But like Blockbuster giving way to Netflix, more diverse and effective opportunities for these communities are now available, and that's both exciting and necessary. As an institutionalized churchgoer, I began to compare the body count to the benefits, and the opportunity cost is far too high. Many others will support them if you make a much bigger difference elsewhere, and few will save the precious lives that you can. We talked a lot about making your money more fruitful, but I think you can see that this also makes your money so much more fulfilling. When you follow Jesus and giving yourself to the least of these, your money is no longer a life-draining goal. It's a life-giving tool. Instead of a transient status symbol that's a pain in the butt to maintain or repair, or instead of a Sunday morning refresher, it offers the everyday fulfillment of knowing you're saving lives. Your money is no longer an end, it's a means to the immensely fulfilling end of being all of who you were created to be. If you're looking for purpose or joy, there seriously is no greater fulfillment than waking up and going to sleep every day knowing you're doing the most good for those most in need who God specifically created you to serve. And that's why Worldwide House Church organizes our charities by cause, so it's super easy to most effectively not just be a part of the body, but be your part of Christ's body, in ways that different groups simply don't allow. Here, you can take your passion for women empowerment, or passion for healthcare, or passion for refugees, or passion for education of children, or passion for first responders and veteran care, or etc., etc., etc. You can be that part of your body in ways that you simply can't within certain other groups or institutions. But don't take my word for how fulfilling this can be. God has a few words himself. In Isaiah 58, he tells us if we do away with the yoke of oppression and spend ourselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, in other words, if we focus on the least of these, then our light will rise in the darkness and our night will become like noon. The Lord will guide us always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land, strengthen your frame, and make you like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. So many of us struggle with whether we're good enough. We doubt ourselves. We wonder if we're making a difference in this world. And some of that is very simply because we're not focusing on the type of generosity that God does. At Worldwide House Church, we can attest to this fulfillment. God has kept this promise again and again. That's why our founders give 75% of their income away. It's why our crew spends its own time and resources giving you this site for free. And it's why you can't even give us money. You can only give it to those most in need. In my own life, I can't overemphasize enough how much joy and fulfillment and purpose this has given me. And we want that for you. You are sorely needed to nourish the global body of Christ. And there are beautiful, valuable people who are desperate for you to play the role in that body that only you can. So let's do this together. Make your money exponentially more fruitful and fulfilling. Make the biggest difference around the globe for those who need you the most. And join us as we follow Jesus to bring the church back home.